Good afternoon. My name is Jacqueline Moore, and I am the chairperson for the Oregon Public Defense Commission Audit Committee. Today is Monday, March 9th, 2026, and it is 1 o'clock or 1300 for those that keep military time. We have an agenda that's been posted. Generally, overall, we should have plenty of time to get through everything on our agenda. We may be completed early. At this time, I just want to make an announcement. We have a brand new member that's joined our audit committee, and that would be our commissioner, Haley Olson. And at this time, I just need to take rolls. So if you are here, please take yourself off of mute and say you're here. Deanna Horn. Okay. Reed Kajakal.
I'm here.
Awesome. David Terry.
Here.
John Hutzler.
Mm.
Haley Olson. I saw her join. Haley, just take yourself off mute and say you're here. Maybe not. We'll come back. Ralph Amador.
Here.
Awesome. Kimberly Freeman.
Here.
Perfect. And Scott Martin.
Present.
And then Haley, are you here? Can you hear us? Seeing that she's online, but maybe not having technical difficulties. This time we don't normally have an agenda item for public comments, but we do, since we are a publicly held meeting. Are there any public comments or submissions, Mara, at this time?
No, there are not.
Okay, perfect. All right, well then we can jump right into our first agenda item and focus on our current internal audit workload. I'm going to turn it over to Scott Martin.
Yeah, just a moment. Okay. Yeah, there's three things mainly that I'm working on right now. The advisory engagement specific to management communication. Just to read real quick the scope of that for everybody. The scope of that engagement is management communication to staff to ensure relevance and timeliness. The period under review will be from January 1st, 2025 to present. The objectives, and there are three of them. Validation of perceived operational risk. These are communicated via survey and then through interviews. Identification of specific management communications or lack of communication. And then the third is development of staff-based solutions and IA recommendations for each of the management communication issues that may come to light. That's one of the items I'm working on. The second one is evaluation of status of the prior audit recommendations, and I'm going through those currently. I can hit that later in the meeting in more detail, but right now I can say that we have 27 outstanding audit recommendations that are being worked on actively. And then the last item is the external quality assurance work being done for a peer agency. I'm participating in that with Oregon Housing and Community Services. That's providing me with a lot of insight into how our agency is going to be evaluated in another year, maybe two. So it's really, really important to gain that knowledge and to help out our peers. And so those are the three things I'm working on.
Are there any questions for Scott regarding the current internal audit workload? Hearing none, we can move on to our next agenda item. Turn it over to Ralph and Kim for update from management.
Ralph, who's going first? I'll let you go first.
Sure. Give me 1 second. So currently we're just closing the 2026 legislative session. We did get a number of things in that session. I mean, it was net zero for everything, so it wasn't a lot of things that were new. We did expand we did expand. I'm trying to bring up I had the documents open and then I closed them, which is par for the course. So what we did do is we added because of Robert's ruling that happened a few months ago, we added some staff to the trial division. We added additional staff to the trial division. So we're getting about, I think, 8 new attorneys in the trial division effective on, it's open up right now. So for the Oregon Trial Division, for the Roberts response, we've got 2 senior deputies, and 6 deputy defenders that are starting in the trial division in March. We also have 5 support staff, which is 2 case assignment coordinators. The 5 support staff are, I believe, 2 legal secretaries, a paralegal, a case manager, and an investigator. We did do a budget realignment where we moved 7 attorneys from the CAP division to the newly formed Resource Council division, and 1 admin person moving over there. We moved a senior research analyst out of procurement and administrative services to CAP research, and we moved 1 operations policy analyst 3, which is our public affairs person from the case management system, to the legislative and communications division. We lowered our other funds for ACP application contribution program, which is the thing we coordinate with the Department of Justice. There was a discrepancy in the other funds, and other funds have to match between state agencies. So we lowered that $952,000. It's other funds limitations, expenditure limitations. So there's no money taking place there. It's generally passed through. We did incur some budget reductions in the form of $1.3 million of general fund. $50,000 is being reduced from the executive and services supplies from the executive division. $612,000 is being taken from CAP out of vacancy savings. That has to do with a deputy general counsel position. I'm sorry, not deputy. It's a deputy general counsel position that's being held vacant for the remainder of the biennium, and that money will be saved on a one-time basis. We're not filling an OS2 position for the remainder of the biennium, so that's going to save us $100,000. And we are has some vacancy savings from a vacant position that has been filled, about $50,000. $313,000 is taken from the trial representation division in training and travel reductions. $188,000 of that has to do with rent savings because we moved out of the interstate office in Northeast Portland, and so we are currently now in the Multnomah County Courthouse and the Clackamas County Courthouse. Then we took some training money, $133,000 of training money away from them on a one-time basis. And then we also gave a $321,000 of general fund services and supplies tied to 3 law school clinics that are funded in OPDC. This represents the unspent amount of funds from the 23-25 biennium. So the law schools are getting the money that they were allocated by the legislature to the penny of what they asked for, but the money that was left over from last biennium is being taken into savings for the state budget rebalance. We did get some salary pot money, about $3.6 million. That has to do with bargain increases that happened due to collective bargaining, step increases, and other things that happened. And that's just money that's added to our budget. And House Bill 5204 also rescheduled the $22.1 million that was unscheduled in our main budget bill. This is not new money. I'll say it again. $22.1 million is not new money. It was in our budget. It was just unscheduled money. We couldn't save it until we turned a report in the January interim ways and means, which we did, and it was accepted in the 2026 session. We are currently engaging in building our 2027-29 continued service level budget and our agency request budget, which will be due in August. We over the next 2 days, we're going to have 2 town halls over the lunch hour tomorrow and Wednesday, where we're going to explain the budget process. I think it needs to be stated that we are in a zero-sum game right now, meaning that any new investments we get in the agency will have to be balanced by money that we already have in our budget. Meaning, if you want to introduce a program, you have to give something up. There is no new money going to be allocated for anything new, meaning as we go forward, and that's the message we have to get out to people. There were 3 reports that were given since the last time we made. There were trial capacity, there were agency status, and another one that we had to turn into the legislature in order to meet our requirements of our budget notes from our agency budget bill. And at the end of this month, we'll be turning in our COOP, our first COOP, which is our continuing operations plan. So that will be due this month. I think that's all. Oh, and I believe that we are also starting an externship program for first-year law students who will complete first year at the end of this year, and that's going to start this summer, I believe. Don't know anything else that's going on that I can report on, and I'll turn it over to Kim. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. One correction I do want to make in reference to the ACP program and our budget realignment. Ralph, you said DOJ and it's OJD. So sometimes those, initials get intermixed, but it is with OJD, so the Oregon Judicial Department. So I think the only things to add from Ralph is we are working on our proposed new key performance measures for the 27-29 biennium. We have been working with the board. So we are working also to change consistency of names. So when I talk about the board, that is our 13-member commission. So that's the board now. So we have presented to our board our proposed KPMs. They have been presented to the legislature and to our legislative fiscal officer and our budget officer. We do have some feedback on our proposed KPMs and some additional work that we will be continuing to work on around our key performance measures before they are again put back to our board for final approval and then back to legislative for final approval in 27-29. We are working on some recruitments in the agency. So currently, I know there's positions in our trial division that they're recruiting for, and we do have an open, it may have actually closed, I think today maybe is the last day, for a program analyst who will be joining the contract compliance analyst. We just changed their name, but those are our they used to be called program analysts, and they work with our capacity contractors. And so we're adding another staff person to that team, which that will really help kind of spread out some of the work that's being done by the staff of 3 right now. There's lots of collaboration with the contract that was initiated in October for our capacity contractors. So there's a lot of work happening between our data and research team with our contract compliance analysts, along with our case assignment coordinators. And again, we're trying to create internal dashboards from our reporting and everything that we have available to make the tools for our those 2 teams to work really collaboratively together and simplifies things. Instead of looking at several screens, they'll be looking at 1 or 2 so they can assign cases quicker. We can look at caseload reporting from our capacity contractor. So there's a lot of cross collaboration of what will work for everyone. The policy team continues to work across the agency in creating policy along with process. So it isn't, again, just creating policies. We're also working with each of the sections and the divisions. So when policies are created, we're creating a process manual as well and or additional forms. And so that work is ongoing, and we're, again, cross working with DAS to ensure we have all the DAS policies that will align here at OPDC. If we cannot incorporate the DAS, so that's the Department of Administrative Services policy, we will then work with that particular policy to make sure it meets OPDC needs. And if it doesn't, then we start from scratch and create new policies. But we've got that work is ongoing. There's probably a few other things that I can think of, but that's on my list and everything else that Ralph is working on. But I know teams are starting to work on their budgets with the budget team with Ralph and his budget team. So just lots of internal things happening. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ralph and Kim. Are there any questions before we move on? I see John's hand up. Go ahead, John.
Yeah. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on the contract compliance function. Did I hear you say that's a 3-member team?
Yes, so we've had a 3-member team for some time now. So hopefully we'll add a new person here to make it 4, but those are the staff that works with our capacity contractors. So they are looking at, one, to ensure that whatever the contract requirements are, so like caseload reports are due on a certain day every month. So they'll make sure the reports are in. They also work with the provider in the local jurisdiction. So each of the each of the contract analysts are assigned a jurisdiction. So I'm going to use Reed as an example. In Reed's area or Reed's jurisdiction, he has a contract compliance analyst that works with Reed and his agency, along with every other one of our capacity contractors. So this team does not work with the hourly attorneys. They only work with our what we call our capacity contractors. So they're making sure that all the requirements of the contracts are met. They work with them when there's vacancies, when we need to fill those vacancies, if there's any changes in the contract as far as capacity within those entities. They work very, very closely with them. So,
and could you give me a sense of what proportion of the workload is handled by these contract um, capacity contractors?
they have all the workload. I mean,
Oh.
so they actually manage the contracts. They work with a provider, so that is their main function.
What I meant was what proportion of cases are handled by capacity versus hourly?
Well, we
providers?
have, I think don't quote me on this, but I think the last hourly contract, we have like 220 hourly contracts, and those contracts are administered by our trial support and development team. And so all of those are done there, and then all the contracts that we have, and I can look that up to see exactly how many capacity contractors we have, but those would be all of our nonprofit organizations and all of our consortium partners, our PCRP, so our parent-child representation program. So they have all of what we call our capacity contracts. So they have all of those. And then we have some statewide contracts that the team also works with. So they have a huge lift, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah. What I'm really asking is what proportion of the agency's workload is handled by capacity contractors versus hourly, or alternatively, maybe what proportion of expenditures for defense go to the capacity contracts versus the hourly providers. Something that gives me a sense of the proportion of workload in each category.
Okay. Perfect. I'll have to follow up with you on that, John.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarity as well.
Reed is next.
Thanks. I had a couple of questions about some of the budget notes that were given. I think the first was that we had to reduce the budget by $1.3 million. Is that right? And that was from savings from different parts of the agency. Is that the number that I heard correctly?
That's right. You're correct. About 1.3, and those were reductions. So back in November, October, because we were the revenue forecast was down, all agencies were required to give 5 and 10% reductions across the board. 1.29 was our governor's target. And then we had to give 5% and 10% for the entire agency. That was the target we had to meet in response to the changes at the federal level, the fact that we're facing a $15 billion downstream effect from all of the changes that happened at the federal level with general fund and federal funds.
So that is I want to say loss, but a loss that's been kind of manifested on the agency that cut has been made. Is that right?
That money is being taken from us as soon as the governor signs the bill. That money will be gone from us. Yes, it's mainly administrative stuff that's being taken away, making it harder to do day-to-day operations. But it's just the nature of the beast.
I saw that $313,000 of that was for travel and training expenditures. Does that include for travel? Did I mishear that?
No, $313,000 was for the the trial division, our in-house people. 180,000 of that was because we were budgeted for external rent at in interstate office in Portland. We moved out of the interstate office into the Multnomah County Courthouse, right. And because of the way courthouses are designed, there's a funding package that goes along with having representation in there when they do that, so that we have offices in the Portland, Multnomah County Courthouse, and in the newly constructed Clackamas County Courthouse. We don't pay rent there, so we gave that money back. And then the rest was $100,000 in training, and it's $130,000 in training and travel. For mainly for training, but then training for travel for training like that.
But trial division attorneys are going to need to keep a regular CLE annual requirement. Is that money that we don't have to spend on the trial division's CLEs? I guess that's my question.
It reduces the amount that we can. Yeah, we're trying to figure out. So attorneys have 3 years to get their CLEs. And so then we're trying to figure out a program to where we can get that done. Does it cut things pretty short? Sure it does. But if we hire attorneys for 1 year, then they don't have to get all 45 credits in 1 year. They get 3 years to get the credits. So it's roughly 15 credits per year over 3 years that we're trying to budget for.
The new attorneys have a 1 year first swearing in CLE credit cycle. Are you hiring new attorneys out of law school? Because if a first year attorney has
we're not. We're targeting people who have experience doing trial now. I don't think we'll hire anybody straight out of law school. I'm not going to say we won't, but we need people that can start taking misdemeanors and C-level felonies to meet the caseloads of the unrepresented and the Bechards and the Roberts cases. So
just two other budget notes that I was interested in. You said that there was $1.2 million that came into the agency for I think step and tier and additional just kind of administrative pay raises. Is that right?
So every state employee is on a pay scale. They get a raise every year according to the pay scale. There were bargaining COLAs that were done through collective bargaining. And so that money was set aside in a SPA at the Department of Administrative level in the long session. So right now they're distributing that money to all agencies going forward.
So that wasn't from the OPDC general budget. That's a separate.
It's got nothing to do with OPDC. Employees. Nothing to do. We're not taking money from anybody else. This is money that came from the governor's office, or actually from the state legislature. The legislature during the long sessions DAS puts together a salary package where they collect all the money for all disbursement for all state agencies. And then depending on how you fall out, they give you funding to cover raises and to cover COLAs. That come and usually the COLAs are done through collective bargaining, because when we price out, so we're in our budget bill, we're going to start budgeting for our 27, 29 positions this April, which is about 18 months before the budget's passed. So in order to keep up with inflation and everything else for salaries, they put together a salary package that DAS does. It's part of their budget.
So I guess just so that I understand that, I mean, it doesn't sound like you're taking money from other people. I don't mean to make that an insinuation, but so that I understand it better, because your state employees, that those COLAs, those annual raises, those step increases are bargained for by all state employees together and then coming out of one legislative package at DAS. Is that how I'm to understand it?
That's a common understanding. So
Okay.
just like in any job, I'm not gonna say any job, but in some jobs you have a pay scale 1 through 10. So there's different rates of pay that people, if as long as they're performing employees or doing it, whatever it is, they get a step increase every year. That's how state salaries are done. So as I say, an attorney comes on board, their pay scale is from either 1 to 7 or 1 to 9, depending on what level they come in. They'll get hired at one level, and that level is decided by a pay equity analysis. Depending on their experience, they'll come in step 5. So they'll get the next year, a year later, they'll get another step till they max out. When we do our budgeting, we budget for now. So in order to cover the increases down the road, we are given money out of the state SPA, Special Purpose Appropriation, that's held at DAS. And the legislature puts together, if you look at the DAS bill, or you'll see that there's a SPA that's put together for all state agencies. I'm not sure how many collective bargaining agreements we have. I know that we have 3 in 3 plus management and non-union for our area. So they negotiate COLAs and everything else and other things that they want to get. And then that's decided on the statewide level. And then that money's put into that same SPA later on, because that's not money our bargaining doesn't take place until the long session's happening, and our money for salaries has already been decided in our current service level.
Understood. Thanks, Ro. Yes, that makes total sense.
Yeah, nothing's coming. We're not taking money from any other program in the department to fund that.
And Reed, just to add to that, collective bargaining central table is not at the discretion of management. They can't determine what gets awarded there apart from that. So central table goes and they discuss with the unions, and the unions and central table come to an agreement, and that's kind of just told to the agencies what was agreed to and what's going to be changed. And so they have no oversight or change to tell the union we're not going to pay that or honor that. That's done at central table with little oversight or impact by management for a purpose, for separation.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. It's just that what it sounds like is that the state level trial level attorneys will, regardless of budget, get their COLAs, get their step increases, while if you flatten the expenditures, I guess, to all the other contract providers, then it makes it exceedingly difficult for contract providers to also give COLAs, also give step increases, also give earned promotions, because the budget just doesn't exist, right? And the budget doesn't exist because of the flat budget. The budget doesn't exist. The budget for that doesn't exist because of increased health insurance costs, like those kinds of savings, or those kinds of expectations are not equal across the board. So I just
it's definitely felt across the board on every agency. As someone who's not at OPDC at Oregon Military Department, we also have to figure out our budget and lowering costs to try to complete the need for paying some of the COLA adjustments and the one-time payments that were negotiated at central table, and the fact that not all of that, which is, it's public record, was not all of that was not rolled out equally to all employee levels. So like, they were capped at like salary level 30s got certain considerations, and anybody above that didn't get the same considerations. So I mean, the unfair unequalness of, people who are management or people who are contracted salary versus people who are under the collective bargaining agreement is felt across the board. But it's really not controlled at our level. That's legislative and central table and DAS. So we have no say so or oversight for those considerations. So
That's understood.
You're not wrong in that it seems unfair, but
Can I make one more comment?
Control.
Could I add one more comment, Reed? You were getting at the holding flat. In our current service level budget, we will be we do have an opportunity to ask for inflation. And the way we pay providers, such as yourself, we get above standard inflation for those payments, which is how we got raises for the providers this current biennium, was that they were raised 6.9% across the board. So there was an increase given to providers. It wasn't what folks wanted, but it was a 6.9% increase across the board for contracted providers. I can't say what's going to happen, but when we do our current service level budget, we will be increasing those payments by that amount and trying to pass that forward. Now, what happens at the governor's budget, what happens at the legislative session, I don't have any control over. But in our budget bill, we will be asking for that money to get increases at that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph, for clarifying. Okay, we are about 2 minutes behind schedule. I'm going to move over to Scott for review of the current status timeline for all of the management responses for the outstanding audits.
Okay, and I'm going to share my screen real quick. If you can see that should be a Excel chart. Can you see that? Is that okay? And what you're seeing there then are a reduction of, looking at the Kernet-Stokes audits, for example, there's a reduction of 5 over the last quarter. We still are carrying there's 9 here, I think, for spots cards. And I've worked with each of the managers on these. A status update will be due by some of these are the first part of April, but we've got a governor's agency expectation report that's due in March. And so I'm working with each of these managers to get statuses where they can either be closed or reasons given for a new implementation date. So that is in progress. The 7 here is that's the PAE and AP audit that's new. There's only 1 that's due there. Otherwise, that one is still within its range. I can go through each of these if anybody has any questions, but just know that there's work being done on that, and that will be reporting out to the governor through DAS on the status of these and giving reasons for their delay and their intended implementation date in the future. So that is pending. Any questions on that?
John, go ahead. Oh, John, you're on mute.
Am I reading this correctly, Scott, that over the past year, not a single internal audit recommendation has been closed?
That would be correct, because the Kernet-Stokes and I think the sole source audit were all done externally. So yes, that would be spots card, it would be PAE, and then also of CAP. That's carrying the 2 that you see there. The CAP one is related to some organizational sort of changes. Where does CAP fit? That's another item on our agenda today. And so that's been pending a decision on internal audit and CAP and their structure. That's why that's been allowed to persist.
I'm sorry, the sole sourcing audit says IA, isn't that internal audit?
It's an sole source. It's internal audit of. Oh, I'm sorry. No, internal audit of sole source. That is internal audit. I'm sorry. Kernet-Stokes is our external There was one
That was
before
that
that.
was one of the first audits, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's true. Latham did that one. I think that was back in 2023. That's correct. So that has not had action on that since then. It's been 3 years. So management will need to speak to why that has taken some time, and the governor may be asking us more about that.
I do believe that as a mentor for Chief Audit Executive Counsel to Scott, and not part of this committee, Scott and I would be talking about what it means to close out those audits and what would be required. So that's not a part of this committee workload. It's more of a mentorship role for the state. So. John, any further comments before we move on to David? No? Okay, David, go ahead.
Just kind of a technical question for Scott. Scott, have you thought about how much time you would like to have elapse before you come to the conclusion that management is accepting the risk on the recommendations you or others have put in their audit reports?
That's a very good question. I've spoken with the director a little bit about that, and I think the complexities of some of these issues are not time-based. There's going to be resources and whatnot that would impact that. So what the director has asked for me to do is to come up with some kind of a process wherein a discussion is held after a certain period of time, or let's say after an implementation date is missed. Then we say, well, by this criteria that we've laid out, or by these kinds of things, we need to make a decision, because at some point, passively, management has accepted the risk, and we exist with a risk from a finding perpetuating and still existing without any mitigation. So yes, there's been some thought about that, and I'll be drafting some process to, I think, champion a point of discussion that then may result in a letter that management says we accept risk from this point on for these reasons. That may happen 2 months after an implementation date, maybe a year, but it's something that we need to figure out, because they can't persist like this for this long. I think we've had some legitimate reasons, resources and whatnot, and that's something management can speak to, but I think going forward, we need to have a policy.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add to that, because it's a public record meeting, is that we have to be really careful as an agency of public funds used to accept risk. Unlike a private organization, we have to be really careful about saying risk is acceptance, because the risk tolerance for the public is zero for state agencies. They instill public trust for us to do things, so they don't want us to carry risk. So when we do risk accepted, usually it's with the caveat, especially for internal audit, that we accept risk with the contingency that another review would be done to look at impacts of that risk acceptance to the likelihood of the risk occurring, and then the likelihood of the impact of it. So how much did it impact? So we accepted a risk. We know that we're doing something wrong with internal controls. We haven't yet fixed it. We accepted it, going back and re-looking at it to see, did that event occur? And then what was the actual impact? And should we have actually mitigated that risk instead of just accepting it? So as internal audit, we have to be really careful about just closing things out for the sake that management doesn't want to execute that risk mitigation plan. Because I'll preface this, because when an audit finding is done, when they're given the findings up front, usually a manager needs to write a response. So they're saying they can make corrective actions if they're choosing not to, like 3 years down the road, because we've had turnover or a new manager has taken over. The issue is the why. Why could before you could say you could take corrective action and now you cannot. So really getting down to the crux of just avoiding fixing internal controls, or is it really a lack of resources, time, availability before it's just saying risk accepted? So, and Scott and I have had a discussion about that, just because it does look nefarious to have an audit finding that's open for 3 years without any progress, especially for this committee's time and resources, just talking about something that's been open for 3 years. But at the same time, just accepting the risk is not always the best practice because it's public. Any questions? Thank you for the thoughtful question, David. I really appreciate your insight. And we will move on to the next agenda item. Scott,
I do have an observation.
Oh yeah, go ahead, John. Sorry, I missed your hand.
It looks to me, Scott, from reviewing the more detailed information about open findings, it looks to me as though you've had significant difficulty even getting a response from management over the last year on a number of these findings and the status of the findings and what management's plans are. Am I correct?
There has been delays in getting updates, and I think a lot of that has to do with their time and priorities and whatnot. But yeah, the updates have been delayed. But recently, I've made a push on a lot of these because there's been tasks and priorities that have been met, and there's opportunities for more follow-up. And so I've made a push on that. So you've seen a lot of the Kernet Stokes audit recommendations reduced, and plans on each of the others for updates and action. For example, Spots Card, there's a new manager assigned to work on those, and I'm working with her, and she's already tasked her team, and I've followed up with members of her team. So I'm finding my way into each of those and getting some action. So I think of late, there's been a lot of progress made, and I appreciate management's support of that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Perfect. Anything else before we move on to the next agenda item? Awesome. All right, let's move into the discussion regarding these meetings being privately held versus publicly. Scott.
Okay, and that is sort of a second or third step from a broader decision that hasn't yet been made. I was hoping by now, and that's why it's on the agenda, that there would be a decision as far as internal audit's role within CAP and have all that sort of figured out so that we would be discussing next steps, resources, changes perhaps to the position description, internal audit charter, audit committee charter, all of those kinds of discussions. And then that would lead into what is our format for discussions based on the governance structure that exists, that kind of thing. We have not received that feedback. That is something that now that the short session is over, that I intend to discuss with Ken in the next couple of weeks. He and I have talked about this, and he has conversations he needs to have before any decisions are made. Once that's done, we may need to have a discussion, a separate meeting between now and June to talk about what does that look like, what guardrails need to exist, what changes are being communicated, what do we need to do in response, and how do we act appropriately going forward to maintain objectivity and independence, that kind of thing, while providing any needed capacity in an area that I don't provide that currently. So that was the intent of that agenda item, and we just really can't talk a lot about it now because I don't have a lot of information. It'd be a lot of what ifs if we talked about it right now.
Does anybody have any like what if statements or concerns that they would like to voice at this time? John, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should spend some time talking about what ifs. I mean, internal audit has largely been on hold in regard to the audit plan that this committee approved, waiting for some guidance from management about the future role of the internal audit function. Um, uh, I think, I think it's time that we moved ahead with the audit plan that this committee approved, rather than, continuing to allow internal audit to be stymied in regard to that plan. So
I
think it's appropriate for this committee to discuss how internal audit should proceed at this point. First of all, given that there has been no further guidance from management about internal audit's role, so my assumption as a member of this committee would be that internal audit, internal audit's role has not been changed, and the CAE um, uh, should be following the direction of this committee through its approval of the internal audit plan, and should initiate the the audit that was highest ranked and planned as the first audit to be performed.
I believe that you are still on par for the course to proceed until direction is changed, correct? That in January you had met with the director and had determined that decision hadn't yet been made whether or not to move your workload, but that you would continue on the path with what was approved until told otherwise, correct?
That is correct. The caveat being, if I begin an audit in CAP for contract compliance and then am given that work, there's a conflict of interest. And so we prioritized the advisory engagement earlier, and then the contract oversight audit would follow after that. So that's why that's been delayed, just a quick switch. But within that period of time, that's the work product that is due, yes.
Until we know whether or not your function is going to change with how you report, we cannot actually discuss whether or not these meetings should be redirected with the commission and how they're restructured, whether they're privately held or publicly held, correct?
I agree.
Does anybody, John, I see your hand still up. Do you have any comments on whether or not these meetings should be held publicly, or we should restructure this committee under a audit committee that answers to the director, then that answers to the committee that we talked before, that these should be held privately? Now, given that House Bill 4177 just passed, there may be some discussion already in tandem with Department of Justice, whether or not a audit committee is now considered a governing body. So that may take that off the table. I'm still waiting to hear back from my legislative component on our own agencies, whether or not audit committee will be made considered a governing body. That said, but prior in our last meeting, we had talked about whether or not we should restructure the audit committee to be like a subcomponent of the committee itself without the need for it to be a public meeting, and readdress the charter to be a little different for the internal audit.
It would be structured differently with myself appointing members of the audit committee.
Mm-hmm.
They would advise just myself and no one else, so they wouldn't be an advisory body, which is a form of a governing body, yes.
Correct. John, go forth, your hand is still up. Oh, trying to take a second down. Go ahead, Reed. I see your hand up.
Yeah, I guess that would be could like change the direction of the committee though, right? I mean, if what Scott's talking about is if he is a part of compliance and audit in the CAP division, and his role is to, if he has a role in contract compliance, then that is looking outwards, and that would be, he'd be serving more of a management function. And if he were looking inwards at the working of the agency and whether or not they were following the rules and managing the risk appropriately, then he would be reporting to the commission, which would be, I guess, separate. And so is that the choice that we are being faced with today? Because I see Scott's role as more, and historically or traditionally, I guess, in this particular audit function for this particular agency, it's been looking inwards, right? It's been an internal audit function, not an external audit function. And so if it's a focus on the agency, then, and Scott were reporting to the commission, then and it'd be a function of the commission, then perhaps Scott would have the ability to get information from the people involved and answer questions about the working of the agency in a way that is, I guess, less. I mean, it's not tied to the agency, right? It's not under management's umbrella. And people may have different answers or different questions than the commission may have different answers and different questions than if Scott were reporting to the executive director and reporting on, I guess, contract compliance and external audit functions. And so my preference would be for it to remain an internal audit function. And if that is better served as a function of the commission as opposed to the agency, then that would be where I would try and direct Scott's attention. But if I'm misreading those like separate functions, then let me know. But that's where I see internal audits function as.
So Reed, I think you have it pretty much on the nose. The way that the Red Book, which is what Scott follows, the IAA Red Book, because he's not Yellow Book, that would be Secretary of State, requires that he have two reporting structures. So the first one being to an audit committee that addresses the work that he does and the work that he is doing. And then the actual administrative function, meaning like approving time off, approving like the need for like administrative stuff. Like I need some resources to be like the agency director. And that's usually the reporting structure of most all internal audit. The internal audit function is not supposed to have any tangible work product to the agency, meaning they're not supposed to perform anything or give any work product that actually adheres to the agency's work in part. Their purpose is supposed to be to review processes, procedures, cash flows, or audits in themselves, or be in a liaison to all external auditors as well to guide audit process or advisory. So the intent is not to actually perform day-to-day function of work. That's a conflict of interest, because if I am reviewing or having a consistent work in a work product, and then I cannot turn around and then audit that work product, because that would be a self-certification risk. Oh yes, I'm great. I do a great job. You're right. There's no flaws. Like you can't audit something that you have a work product stemming from for 1 year. Now, if you're an auditor and you recruit another auditor, you can have them audit the work that they used to do, but they have to wait a full year of outside the program before they can review it. And that's just the Red Book standards that say that. If you have a conflict of interest, you have to note it. Like if you did an advisory project and you made an advice to someone to fix their internal controls, you can't then turn around and audit that same workload on that advice without declaring that conflict. Like I did an advisory report, I told them they should do it this way. Then my audit committee said I need to do an audit of it. They voted on audit. Then I would be telling my audit committee, hey, these are the advisories that I did. So just so you know, there might be a slight bias or a self-confirming bias. And that's where your audit committee would look into your work papers to ensure that you captured all that you had before, to make sure that your audit finding is supported and not just a bias that you're a confirming, because we are all people. So even auditors can have bias, and that's why you have to be very transparent in your work papers. But yes, you're correct. If Scott, which I did write for transparency, most all know here, I did write a letter to Ken, the director, to let him know my thoughts and opinions about changing internal audit's roles and functions and the conflict. And this is before I took over as the chairperson for this committee, just letting him know in a brief discussion of the conflicts what that would look like and what internal audit is supposed to look like. There are workarounds to what they're asking, like not being able to audit that program, like hiring an external auditor. So surely Scott's role could be divided into that work group, and he could do partly of that work, but he could not then turn around and audit it for a year. He can do a annual engagement into that area where he does that workload and does a 100% review once per year. Like 1/4 of his workload per year is geared to reviewing the CAP program and reviewing it either at 100% or doing a test market and that wouldn't be a conflict because that'd be red book. So I have an annual audit, for instance, at the Oregon Military Department, where I review the enlistment enhancement program, where we pay out $1,000. Well, we used to pay out $1,000. We pay out $2,000 for every enlistee that enlists. So I do a review annually of that program. So that's not a conflict of interest. The same can be done for the CAP. You can do an annual every year, same audit, same assurance, same look through. That's acceptable. He could do a quarterly engagement, but what he can't do is have a daily function and it be considered daily work to review his daily workload. That would be a conflict.
So I think, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine. There are workarounds, but that's kind of what's on Ken's plate right now to make a determination, because they did have a position that was scheduled for that, and they do need someone to do that workload. So with like they shared, like Rob shared earlier, when we had to cut our budgets per the governor's expectations and look at cutting things, we were given like, here's your hammer and a screwdriver, and we need you to nail in this screw and hammer at the same time, but you can only use one, so pick one. And when you have limited resources, sometimes that puts management into, we have to do this workload, and we only have these key players, and they have to make hard decisions. And it's not always, you can't always fit the round peg, the square peg in the round hole. Like, you have to figure it out. And so there's some options, and they're just kind of considering what that looks like right now.
I appreciate that Scott has to hear back from management about what their direction is. I'd also add that, the goals of the agency, right? What the agency is tasked with doing is not entirely clear. Is it just to solve the unrepresented problem? Is it to provide a minimally adequate, one warm body to one case? Is that what the agency's goal is? And if they can put like 1-to-1 person to case, that's all we care about? Or does the agency care about having a constitutionally appropriate level of representation? Does it care about having a skilled level of representation? Or does it care about having a level of representation that meets legislative goals or that meets the executive's goals? And the executive is our adversary, right? The executive is the agency that's trying to put people in prison, and the public defenders are trying to keep people out of prison. Yeah. So there's a little bit of a conflict there. And the reason I mentioned those like different goals is that the agency would hear different things if the auditor were external and the auditor were answering to the commission than if the auditor were answering to management and kind of like seeing what's going on in management and answering their questions about what's going on externally. And just out of publicly available information, right? I know I asked this in an email, but this is publicly available information. This question came up like just recently in a lawsuit where the agency was putting together contract terms, and people were suggesting to them that contract term was like unenforceable, unconstitutional. Department of Justice spent a lot of time and money vetting those contracts, spent a lot of time and money giving the agency advice about whether or not that contract term was workable, was constitutional. That caused two providers to sue the agency, not take cases, have an impact on the unrepresented problem. And then after like a 2-day trial, that contract term was found to be unenforceable against those the people that sued. Now, there's an outstanding question about whether or not that contract term is enforceable to all people who signed that contract now, or if that's going to change that relationship. But like those risks and the amount of money spent and the decisions that were made to defend or negotiate or not offer positions or whatever triggered those things, like those risks, I don't know if those were talked about. I don't know if those risks were mentioned, and I don't know if that is a part of the function of the agency, right? So if we are in a public meeting, we didn't talk about it. Like that's because for a while we said these are going to be recorded, these are going to be public. So the audit committee didn't talk about it. Like what were private before that rule change happened, like that was something that we might have raised with the agency, but that is not something that this committee then dealt with once it became a public committee, because the agency said, look, we can't talk about this lawsuit, we can't give strategy, we can't talk about the legal advice that we're getting. So we're gonna keep it to ourselves, right? And so I guess if Scott, I don't know if the commission had any relationship with the agency about whether or not that was a smart course of action, or that was a risk averse course of action, or that whether that was a risk inviting course of action. So if this is a question about like the focus of this committee and the focus of Scott's work, then to me, it makes a lot of sense to have him answer then to the commission, right? So that we can have frank and honest conversations about whether or not the management of the agency is appropriately managing risk. And that's all I have on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Reed. I don't know if Deanna's or John's hand went up first, but I'll just go to Deanna first.
I think it was John's hand that went up first.
Okay.
Go ahead, Deanna. You haven't had a chance to speak yet. Go ahead.
I just one of the real challenges and dangers that I've seen for this agency, and you know, I've been a public defender for almost 25 years now, and so I've seen all kinds of things happen, is that kind of the internal workings of the agency continue to be pretty secretive to begin with. And there aren't clear, those of us who work directly with the agency providing services, we don't always know who to talk to. We don't know what the answers are going to be. This agency has been really chaotic, really, I think, since its inception, almost 20 years ago, really. And it really feels like a fly by the seat of your pants, Old West kind of thing going on. And so anytime we start talking about doing things in secret, I get really nervous, because that's been the culture of this agency for a very long time. And I hope that's changing. But I worry. So there we go. That's my worry.
Thank you for expressing. John, go forth.
So, in response to Reed's comments, I'd like to emphasize again that the highest risk area identified and targeted by the work plan, by the audit plan that this committee approved, was contract management. And the need for an audit of the agency's contract management processes has only increased since we approved that plan. But that audit has not begun. I think it's important for internal audit to begin that audit and not to wait for a decision from management about the future of internal audit. I also think much as I value Jacqueline's communication to the executive director about concerns regarding the possible reassignment of the internal auditor to CAP, I think it is important for this committee, the internal audit committee, to take a position in regard to that, rather than waiting for management to make its decision. Our function is to support internal audit and to support the independence of the internal audit function. That is our primary function. Uh, I would like to move that this committee report to the executive director that it opposes reassignment of the chief audit executive to CAP, and that it supports the independent function of internal audit with reporting, with a reporting structure that that conforms to professional standards of internal audit. I ask for a second.
I'll second.
Okay, so all those in favor say aye.
Now, any further discussion before we vote? I don't think we should just vote on it. There may be other folks who have thoughts.
I'll just add to what John said that contract management was like a target function. This was actually more than a year ago, right? So prior to last contract cycle, for those of you who are not familiar with what happened in last contract cycle, the goal of the agency was to have all contracts signed by July 1. And they had worked back a plan and worked back a schedule that talked about having identify costs, identify needs. There are deadlines in May, there are deadlines in March, right? So the agency had been proposing a timeline and had committed to contracts signed by July 1. And unfortunately, they weren't able to get those contracts finalized in July 1. They offered 3-month extensions to its providers. Most of the providers took the 3 months extensions, and new contracts were finally vetted by October 1. And most of the contracts were signed by October 1, except for the 2 that remained outstanding and were the subject of the lawsuit. So that again, the uncertainty that Deanna talked about was manifested in the last contract cycle, and is something, as John identifies, is something that this committee has been kind of focused on for quite some time now. So I guess with that historical background, I do think that I would agree with John that this is an appropriate communication to have with management, and that waiting for management to, I guess, give Scott direction is doesn't solve any of the problems that we've seen.
John, do you mind if I just jump in ahead of you? Just piggybacking on what Reed said, I can tell you how that uncertainty played out in my personal experience. That we heard a contract was coming, and on September 30th, the agency blew up the consortium I was in, and I had 48 hours to decide whether or not to sign a contract with the state. I was actually in an emergency department with some pretty scary heart issues, negotiating my contract. Like that's they were like, it was like, sign a contract or don't, and do it today. That it was horrifying. And I actually think that I think that there will be a lawsuit filed against the agency related to that, to that particular incident. Not that I'm a party to at all, but it's that Wild West kind of gunslinging sort of thing that actually public defenders do really well, but it's a terrible way to run a state agency. And historically, that's how this agency has been run. And so I, you know, John's motion is well taken with me.
Ralph, you have your hand up. Go forth.
So, couple things. One, I'm gonna just state up that I'm not gonna vote on whatever resolution comes in there because I'm a member of the management, and I'll let the executive director engage how he wants to engage. I don't speak for him. I can say that in the summation of the contract process, there's a lot being left out there. The agency has been going through a lot of turmoil and changes. The executive director, we did have a plan going into the 25-27 biennium that was uprooted by our executive director being let go in the middle of session, and getting a new executive director. It was also issues with being transferred from one branch of government to another one, and finding out to where there are certain rules that have to be followed with contracting. Prior in the judicial branch, yeah, we could just contract how they wanted to be contracted, but in the executive branch, we have rules of engagement for procurement. We hired a procurement manager. We had to do a special procurement. We had to do all kinds of things to set in place to make sure things are actually done in accordance with the procurement rules of the state in the executive branch. I think that's lost on a lot of people, the amount of paperwork and the amount of steps we have to take to make sure that we aren't in violation of things. We did engage with providers. We had a schedule to go through. We rebuilt the contracts. I believe we gave time for review, a couple weeks for review by contractors. We gave a couple weeks for signature by contractors. We backed it up. We were not able to get stuff done by the July 1 deadline, and that was known. We had communicated that out well before July 1st that it was not going to make it. And a lot of providers were signaling that they weren't going to sign because we didn't know what our budget was, which is hard to do at any time. I've worked in other agencies that have contracts as well that providers do sign at the end of the year, and some don't. And so an extension is not out of the ordinary there. We're redoing, again, we had a new procurement manager, new procurement staff, has to play in with a lot of things that go in there, and as an agency is going dynamic and change. I'm not really sure what's meant by the agency's been holding up any internal audits. Again, I'm not involved in that from where I sit. I can only speak towards the procurement methodology and what's been done. And we do have a schedule. We documented everything on our website of everything that we've sent out. And so again, I was reluctant to even speak up there since somebody on the committee has made mention of threat of another lawsuit against the agency. So again, that seems inappropriate for this venue. So again, I'm not going to speak to any of that going forward either. But I did have to make mention that while we're doing a summation of the contracting process, I think we have to consider the entirety of what happened and not just bits and pieces of things that have to go forward. Thanks.
Any other comments?
I'm not going to disagree with Ralph. I would agree with him wholeheartedly that the transition to the executive branch has changed the way that OPDC has done business in a way that is new for everybody. I'm not going to disagree with that. I think that the move to the executive branch has been one of the more damaging things to the function of OPDC as an agency, and one of the biggest challenges to its ability to support its providers. So I would wholly agree with that. I also would agree that the change to the executive branch also allowed the executive director to be fired midstream, right? I mean, that is another data point in which, once again, the governor's trying to put people in prison. We're trying to keep people out of prison, right? So that's one of the, like, for me, like, that's a bottom line disparity that I don't blame like the individuals necessarily working in the agency. That the structure of what was put in place with the change from the judicial to the executive branch, like that structure was not necessarily designed to help providers or to make it easy for the agency to make changes in order to support providers. That being said, having control over the contracting process, as John points out, is one of the things that this committee and the auditor has been interested in for like more than a year, right? For 2 years or more. And I do think that the question about what the function of this committee is also a question about what Scott's role is and whether or not Scott has enough hours in his day or to fulfill that role, or whether or not he needs additional support. For a while, there was a second internal audit position that was a part of it, and whether or not these audits get completed is a function of that as well. I imagine that the agency is spending a considerable amount of money on external audits. I mean, I'm guessing that those don't come cheap. So, like I said, I wanted to add that like I'm not like my comments aren't necessarily directed at the agency because I know that the legislature has made it very difficult for the agency to do its job. The change has made it very difficult for the agency to do its job. But in so doing, it's just exacerbated the previous, questions of transparency, questions of timeliness, questions of accountability that I think the internal audit function is designed to analyze and discuss.
And any more hands? John? It looks like your hand.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of return things to my motion. I mean, we're talking a lot about the importance of an audit of contract management, and that certainly has been on the uh, uh, on the attention of this commission or this committee for some time, and is the highest priority audit on our last audit plan. But the motion that I'm making really relates more to the responsibility of this committee, the internal audit committee, to support the independence of the internal audit function. And uh, uh, in that, and in response to Ralph's comment, I didn't mean to imply that management is actively standing in the way of such an audit. I think it's more accurate to say that management's indecision or delay in regard to a decision about the role of the internal auditor has prompted us and the internal audit, the chief audit executive, to hold off on undertaking this audit that was our highest priority, and instead to address another item on the audit plan. I think that's a decision that was made by the chief audit executive uh, and allowed by this committee. It's not something that management directed. Um, However, uh, given that, I think our responsibility as members of the internal audit committee is to support the independence of the internal auditor and the internal audit function, so that he is free to make decisions independent of management's actions. So that if this committee has identified that as the highest priority audit, that he should be free to undertake that audit and not have to wait for a decision from management about what his role in the future will be. Um, uh, so the thrust of my motion, the specifics of the motion are that the committee should go on record as supporting the independence of the internal auditor, his his responsibility uh, to function in accordance with professional audit standards, and to oppose the dilution of that role by any transfer of the chief audit executive to the CAP division, where his reporting structure would be inconsistent with professional audit standards, and his ability to audit in a high risk area for the agency would be impaired. So if I could, I'd like to call the question.
I do have one caveat to add, John. Previously, on December 24th, the email was sent out to all the audit committee members about the courses of actions that were put forth between management. I'm wondering if everyone here has had a moment to actually read that decision memo, that courses of action memo regarding the different options that management was to decide between. And I don't think Haley, Scott, you'll want to forward a copy of that to Haley, because Haley was not yet on the audit committee to receive a copy of that. But that will give an overall understanding of the different roles and responsibilities for the different courses of actions they're asking management to take, choosing one of them and the recommendation, and how internal audit functions and what it means to prioritize CAP work versus a CAP audit. Because I think the stance should be, if we do vote yes, that we should move forward, that means we're taking a stance on that course of action itself, saying this is the course of action in which you should choose, and this is what the audit committee is standing behind for your course of action to management regarding Scott's role. Scott, am I wrong in assessing that? Because that's what you put forth to leadership to decide, correct?
That is correct. You're correct.
Raise your hand. Well, John, your hand's already raised, but raise your hand if you do not have a copy of that email that was sent or need it to be resubmitted to you. Haley doesn't have a copy. We knew that. Okay. Haley will get you one.
Well, if I could read from that memo, the first option described is to retain the internal audit function as it currently exists, as an independent, objective assurance and advisory function, with the CAE reporting functionally to the audit committee and administratively to agency leadership, consistent with the Oregon administrative rules regarding internal audit. And the conclusion in regard to the risk of that option is that the risk is low. This is the only course of action that preserves full statutory compliance, professional integrity, and governance effectiveness without structural compromise. I think I think in that email, Scott laid out a number of options that are available to management in regard to the internal audit function. In my opinion, this is the only option available to an audit committee whose responsibility is to ensure the independence of the internal audit function.
So what we can do is we can vote to send a letter again to management or response to that letter that was sent, reinforcing the committee's commitment to backing COA 1 as the decision. Correct, John? Is that what you're calling for?
I'm not sure it's necessary to send a description of all the options. I think what's important is for this committee to communicate that that it supports retaining an independent internal audit function rather than transferring it to CAP. But I would accept transmitting the memo again with a clear statement that the internal audit committee and supports option 1.
Perfect. Okay, so let's move for a vote. Ralph is going to abstain. Kim, are you also abstaining from vote?
Correct, I will abstain.
Okay. And let's move for a vote to approve resending this memo to management for the different COAs with the stress immediately known that approved COA 1 is recommended by the audit committee for Oregon Public Defense Commission. Can I get a second for that?
I second.
Reed, do you have comments? No, your hand is up.
Sorry.
No worries. Awesome. All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Unmute
Aye.
yourself. Say aye.
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 Any dissents other than those that are refraining? Nope. Hearing none. Scott, that is your due out to resend this to management with the emphasis that the audit committee today on March 9th, 2026 has all in agreement stated to move. Their suggestion is to move forward with COA 1.
Understood, will do. Thank you.
Jacqueline's letter is attached to that. Will that also go with the memo?
It should. I think it's
attached in my copy.
Yeah, I think it's part of the page numbers too, so it would have to go in whole.
That's my intent, is to send it as a group.
Okay, so having that we are limited on time left, we do have a roundtable portion. Are there any other comments for roundtable at this time?
I think Ralph has his hand up.
Ralph, go forth.
Hi, so when we resend that, I mean, I'm looking at the email, and I wasn't under the impression that there was a response required from anybody else but the executive director. Because it said I've attached a course of actions submitted to the executive director. I've asked that he respond by the 31st to communicate management's decision. So again, maybe it's confusion on my part, but it was to the executive director, and nowhere in here does it ask that we respond or send any responses in. So I guess maybe some clarity on that.
You are correct. It's to the executive director with him selecting a decision in section 5.
Right.
But
I think what we're proposing essentially, Ralph, is that we turn this memorandum into something more than just a memorandum from Scott.
Sure. No,
that the audit committee take a position in regard to these.
Yeah. I understand that, but in just trying to understand as the committee is doing that, is that the memo, when I read the memorandum again, and I remember reading this and I was like, so the decisions don't have all the recommendations on there. It just has a few recommendations. It's got one and four, and there's five recommendations or five recommendations. So there's no real opportunity to say,
So
what
approve with modifications would be selecting a different COA or a different course of action than was recommended. So so I helped in drafting this because this is how we do forth for the military department. So when Scott, because again, I'm Scott's mentor for the CAEC,
sure.
So this is outside of the actual audit committee workload. He had requested how you put forth a decision for management to make when there are multiple courses of actions. I provided him how we do it on our side to document for transparency and also just to remain independent, because Scott, as chief audit executive, does not have an opinion. He can only offer up the different facts. Like, you can do this, you can do this. This is the risk to that. This is the risk to that. Regardless that it's his position being changed, these are all the options that you can pick. You can pick a million options. And we kind of talked ad nauseum about this, but for his recommendation for best practice for the agency to be in compliance would to be only 1 or 4. The other ones are not recommended because they're short term. As you can see, like COA 2 is not recommended because it's not compliant. 5 would have some material loss of independence and assurance, which is a violation of Red Book standards. So the only ones that would seem feasible to move forward on would be 1 and 4, legally, ethically speaking. But there's always the option to approve with modifications, meaning I like 1, I like 4, I like 3. I want you to do all 3, or you can decline all COAs. You can write your own. So that's also an option. Yeah. Being that we are approaching the 60 plus day mark out, there could have been other mitigating factors like budget, which Kim could probably speak to, and you yourself could speak to, that would also change how this has transpired. So this could be dated in of itself, which management would be able to rewrite a different COA at that point. Kim, go ahead. Sorry, you had your hand up.
So thank you, and sorry for the interruption, but Mara left to start the governance subcommittee meeting, which started at 2:30, but she just teams me and she's not able to start because it's also via Zoom.
Okay.
And she didn't know how much longer we would be on this meeting in order to start the governance subcommittee meeting.
We can wrap up the last comments and be done. I don't have anything else to add unless anybody else has anything to add for roundtable.
I do.
Go forth.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that that Ralph and Kim feel obliged to abstain from a vote on this matter. I think they should be free in these meetings to act as members of the audit committee in accordance with their responsibility as members of the audit committee. I think it's unfortunate if they feel that in this venue they must act as members of management, other than in their role as reporting on, what's happening in the management area, reporting to this committee on management developments. I think their role as audit committee members should allow them to act in accordance with the responsibility of audit committee members to ensure the independence of the internal audit function. That being said, I respect their decision, but I think it's unfortunate. And I think it might be it might be helpful to try to clarify with the executive director whether whether management members of the internal audit committee are authorized to be guided by the committee's purpose of ensuring the independence of the internal audit function, even if that may at times be inconsistent with or in conflict um, with the executive director's view of the internal audit function.
I follow what you say. Typically with my audit committee, because that is made up of management, if a management oversees an area such as budget or the work itself, they have to abstain from voting. That's just always been a general rule because there's a conflict of interest because you may vote to not and you may vote to do it, but they're always open for public comment. So if you have a comment, you just can't vote. You don't have a voting say so over an area in which you control. So I'm guessing that Ralph and Ken sustain because they manage the budget and the flow of work for internal audit when it comes to monetary. And I believe Ken oversees some of the cap from what I understand. If I might be wrong, but I think that that's why they probably abstain because it would be a conflict of interest into the work that they do to have a weigh in. Now, whether or not they want to issue comments and whether they agree or disagree, that's perfectly allowable. But to vote on a move of work being directed towards them, I think that would be a conflict state. Reed, you had your hand up.
Sure, just something a little bit different. As a part of my job, I will watch some of the subcommittee, the OPDC subcommittee meetings. And in one of the last subcommittee meetings, one of the commissioners, I think Commissioner Harris, seemed focused on the idea that we should not have two classes of attorneys providing public defense work. And that what the trajectory of this agency seems to be doing is to be going in a direction where we have two classes of attorneys doing the public defense work. That is a class of people who are in the trial division who get paid more, who get better benefits, who have more secure jobs, better, easier access to raises, and have lower caseloads. And people who are not state employees, who are contract providers, who are doing the work for less pay, and more of it at a different level. I don't see any out. Going the rate of the trial division would be extraordinarily expensive, and I'm not sure the legislature is interested in funding that. And I don't know what's going to happen if we try to go the other way. So I just wanted to add that I'm sure the agency is going to hear this tomorrow and the next day at either of the town hall meetings. But that is if we are tasked with making sure that the agency is able to create, recruit, and retain people to do this job so that they have people with whom they can contract. That's something that we're going to have to talk about, or that's something the agency is going to have to talk about on a long-term basis. That's all I have.
Thank you, Reed. Whenever the Scott goes into developing the overall risk assessment and start for CAP when he moves into the audit, when it happens, one of the suggestions that I had made with him as his mentor before was focusing in on the scope and the objective, and one of that looking at like not just internal processes and how it does or contract compliance, but whether or not like the feedback from community about how contracts are being done and the intent of the fairness of it is something that we have brought up before. That's certainly part of this committee's responsibility is to direct when he develops his scope to approve that scope and objective of work along with management before beginning on the audit. So, but we do need to move forward to adjourn this meeting so we can start the commission subcommittee meeting, okay? So we do need to wrap up. Do we have any last minute comments before we adjourn? Hearing none. Thank you so much for all your time. And if you have any comments, questions, or need anything from me regarding that memo that was sent out, please reach out. If you don't know my direct contact information, I think it's at the bottom of that letter. So feel free to.
Sorry, Jacqueline, I do have one question. Scott raised the possibility in his introduction that that the committee might want to schedule an interim meeting. Our next meeting is not scheduled until June, and if a decision comes down from the executive director that would change the role of the CAE, it might be advisable to call an interim meeting to address the issues that raises in regard to the need to change charters and so forth. Is that something that you and Scott will do once the decision is made?
We'll have to coordinate that with Mara for availability and send out the invite, and then just notify me and everyone else as well about the need for a special session in interim. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time today. I know it's super valuable. I know that you guys have a lot on your plate. I appreciate you. And please reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.